The rain had turned the road to black glass. Alexander Blackmore, Duke of Ashworth, pressed his heels into the stallion's flanks and leaned forward against the horse's neck, his fingers tangled in the soaked mane. The pocket watch in his waistcoat pressed against his ribs with each stride. His father's watch, the one that never ran fast enough. 3 hours since the letter had reached Thornfield. 3 hours of mud and darkness and a horse that was beginning to falter. The animal's breath came in great white plumes that the wind tore apart before they could form, and beneath the hooves, the gravel of the North Road had dissolved into something that grabbed at every step like desperate hands. He could see the spire of St. Edmund's now, a thin finger of stone against a sky that was not quite black and not quite grey, the colour of a bruise before it turns. Light in the windows, not candlelight, something brighter, warmer. The kind of light that meant people were still inside. He pulled the watch from his waistcoat without slowing, tilted it toward the faint glow from the church. 23 minutes past 11. The ceremony had been scheduled for 1:15. He rode harder. The doors of St. Edmund's stood open, not wide, just enough for the November air to slip through and make the candle flames bow like courtiers. Alexander swung from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped, his boots striking the wet stone steps with a sound that cracked through the silence like a pistol shot. Inside, the nave was nearly empty. A dozen witnesses in the forward pews, county families dressed in their second best, the kind of attendance that said obligation rather than celebration. The vicar stood at the altar rail with a register book open in his hands, his pen already moving. And at the centre of it all, 2 figures. Lord Philip Hargrove, 53, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a coat that cost more than most of the witnesses earned in a year, stood with one hand resting on the altar rail. Proprietary. The way a man touches a fence post on land he has just purchased. Beside him, in ivory silk that caught the candlelight and held it, stood Eleanor Voss. She turned when she heard his boots. Every head in the church turned. But hers was the only face he saw. Pale, composed, utterly still. Her copper hair was pinned beneath a veil of French lace, and her green eyes found his across 30 feet of stone floor with the precision of a marksman. She did not flinch. She did not smile. She did not look away. Alexander's hand found the back of the nearest pew. He gripped it until the wood bit into his palm. "The register has been signed," the vicar said, his voice carrying the particular discomfort of a man who has just realized he is standing in the middle of something far larger than a wedding. The ceremony concluded at 19 minutes past the hour. 6 minutes. He had missed it by 6 minutes. Eleanor's gaze held his for 3 more seconds. He counted them against the pocket watch's rhythm in his chest. And then she looked away. Not down, to the side, toward the stained glass window where St. George was killing a dragon that looked, in the candlelight, almost sympathetic. Hargrove's hand moved from the altar rail to Eleanor's elbow. "My wife," he said, and the word landed in the nave like a stone in still water. He found her in the vestry. She had stepped away from Hargrove to sign a second copy of the register. Parish records required duplicates. And when Alexander entered the small stone room, she did not look up from the document. "You are 6 minutes too late, Your Grace." Her voice was level. Not cold, level. The kind of voice that costs something to maintain, like a fire that appears effortless but requires constant feeding. Why? His boots left wet prints on the vestry floor. Rain dripped from his coat onto the stack of hymnals by the door. "Eleanor, why did you not wait?" The ceremony began at the appointed time. She set down the pen. Her hand did not tremble. "I do not control the punctuality of other men's horses." "You know that is not what I am asking." She turned then, fully. The candlelight from the wall sconce caught the edge of her jaw, the hollow below her cheekbone, the strand of copper hair that had escaped the lace and lay against her neck like a question mark. "You are asking why I married him." Her fingers found the edge of the registry desk. She held it the way a captain holds a tiller, not for comfort, but for course. "And I'm telling you that the answer is none of your concern." I was coming to stop it. Yes. She said it the way a doctor confirms a diagnosis, with neither hope nor judgment. I expected you would try. Then why? Because some doors must be walked through before rescue arrives. Her chin lifted. Not defiance, precision. I made a choice, Your Grace, with open eyes and a clear mind. You may disagree with it. You may rage against it. But you may not undo it. The vestry smelled of old ink and damp stone, and the faintest trace of lily of the valley. The perfume she always wore, the one he could identify across a crowded room like a frequency only his ears could detect. He wanted to cross the 3 feet between them. He did not. Your sister, he said. Is Marguerite safe? The word came fast and hard, like a door closing. She will remain safe. That is all you need to know. Footsteps in the nave. Hargrove's measured tread, recognizable by its tempo. Unhurried, deliberate. The walk of a man who has never been required to rush. Eleanor straightened. The strand of copper hair she tucked behind her left ear with one finger, a gesture he had seen 100 times, in drawing rooms and gardens, and once, memorably, while she argued about tenant farming practices with a fluency that had made his steward go pale. Go home, Your Grace. She moved toward the door. Dry your coat, stable your horse, and do not come to Blackmere Park. Hargrove appeared in the vestry doorway as Eleanor passed through it. He stepped aside with the exaggerated courtesy of a man making a point. See how I yield, see how generous I am. And then turned to Alexander with a smile that did not quite reach the architecture of his face. Ashworth. He extended a hand. His nails were immaculate. How kind of you to attend, despite the weather. I hope the roads were not too punishing. Alexander did not take the hand. Hargrove. Lord Hargrove. Or, if you prefer. The smile widened fractionally. Eleanor's husband. One does enjoy the sound of it. Fresh, like a new coat. He was a man assembled from expensive components. The silver hair groomed to military precision. The Savile Row tailoring, the signet ring that caught light like a small weapon. But up close, in the honest glow of vestry candles, the seams showed. A network of broken capillaries across the bridge of his nose. A tightness around the mouth that spoke of habitual control. Not of emotions, but of other people. I trust you will call on us, Hargrove continued, adjusting his cuff. Blackmere Park is undergoing renovations. Eleanor has opinions about wallpaper, it seems. I find it endearing. For now. The last 2 words hung in the air between them. Alexander's hand found the pocket watch through his waistcoat. The metal was warm from his body, the engraved case smooth beneath his thumb. I will call, he said, when the time is appropriate. Splendid. Hargrove turned toward the nave, then paused. Over his shoulder, without turning fully. 6 minutes, I'm told. Such a small margin. The difference between a guest and a groom, measured in hoofbeats. A sound that might have been a laugh. Good evening, Ashworth. Alexander stood in the empty vestry for a long time after the carriages had gone. The candle guttered. The rain continued. The pocket watch ticked against his ribs with the mechanical indifference of a device that does not understand what it has measured. He did not sleep. The library at Thornfield Hall had the particular quantity of cold that stone houses develop in November. Not the sharp cold of winter, which at least has the courtesy to announce itself, but the insidious cold of autumn turning, which seeps through wool and skin and settles in the joints of a man who has spent 3 hours on horseback in the rain. Alexander sat in the wing chair by the unlit fireplace. The pocket watch lay open on the arm of the chair, its face turned toward the ceiling. 19 minutes past 11. He had not reset it. His steward, Collins, entered at 7 with a tray he had not requested, and information he had not sought but would need. Hargrove has acquired 3 more debt notes this quarter, Your Grace. Collins set down the tea with the particular care of a man delivering bad news alongside breakfast. 2 from families in Whitchurch, 1 from old Mr. Pemberton. That makes 11 families in the county who owe him directly. Their debts. Significant. Pemberton's alone exceeds £400. The interest, Hargrove applies. Collins paused. It is not illegal, Your Grace, but it is not neighbourly. Alexander picked up the watch, closed it. The click was louder than it should have been in a room this size. Find out everything about Hargrove's mining interests in the Shropshire Hills. Leases, mineral rights, survey reports. And the Voss family debts. What exactly did he acquire, and when? Collins nodded once. He did not ask why. Good stewards, like good butlers, understand that the most valuable service they provide is the absence of unnecessary questions. The fire remained unlit. 3 weeks later, he told himself it was a social obligation. Neighbours called on neighbours. It was the architecture of rural English life, as fundamental as hedgerows and drainage ditches. The fact that he had dressed with more care than usual, the charcoal coat rather than the brown, a fresh cravat tied with deliberate precision, was coincidence. Blackmere Park had always been a handsome house, with an ugly disposition. Jacobean stone, mullioned windows, a drive lined with elms that seemed to lean inward as if trying to hear what happened inside. Under Hargrove's previous occupancy, it had been a bachelor's establishment. Functional, expensive, devoid of warmth. Under Eleanor's management, something had shifted. Not the furniture, not the drapes. The air. The maid who answered the door smiled, genuinely smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes and suggests that the household is fed regularly and spoken to with basic decency. She led him to the morning room, where Eleanor sat at a writing desk, a ledger open before her, a pen moving with the rapid efficiency of someone who understands numbers. Your Grace. She stood. Her dress was simple. Grey wool, high collar, practical. Her copper hair was pinned in a low coil that exposed the line of her neck. She gestured to the chair opposite, with the composure of a woman who had expected this visit, and had decided in advance exactly how much she would allow. Lady Hargrove. The name tasted wrong in his mouth, like biting into fruit that looks ripe but isn't. Lord Hargrove is in London. She sat, smoothing her skirt with one motion. He is expected to return Thursday. Shall I convey your regards? I did not come to see Hargrove. A pause. The clock on the mantel, a French ormolu piece that belonged to a grander room, ticked with irritating precision. Tea? She asked. He accepted. She poured with hands that were steady, certain, practiced. The cup she offered him was filled to exactly the correct level, not a social nicety, but a statement of control. I am managing. I am competent. I am holding this household and myself together with the same grip. The gardens, he said. You've begun work. The south border was dead. She added no milk to her own tea. Everything Hargrove's previous gardener planted was ornamental, pretty and useless. I replaced it with herbs and kitchen vegetables. The cook was... She paused, and something almost warm crossed her face. Grateful does not cover it. Speechless. You are transforming the estate. Her cup met the saucer with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. I am making it habitable. There is a difference. He did not intend to return the following week. The intention formed independently of his will, the way weather forms, gradually, inevitably, with no single moment where one can point and say, there, that is where it began. He found her in the garden between the two estates, a stretch of land that belonged technically to neither property, a remnant of some medieval boundary dispute that had never been resolved. Wild roses grew there in summer. In November, it was bare earth and sleeping roots, and the skeletal architecture of things waiting to return. Eleanor was on her knees. Actual knees, actual earth. Her gloves stained, and her hair escaping its pins in copper threads that the wind arranged and rearranged against her neck. She was planting bulbs. Tulips, she said without looking up. They'll come up in April. You are planning for spring. I am planning for something. She pressed earth over the bulb with both palms, a gesture that was gentle and firm simultaneously, the way one holds a promise. I find that putting things in the ground helps. You give something to the earth, and it holds it for you until you're ready. He crouched beside her. The soil smelled of rain and iron and the particular sweetness of organic decay, the smell of things becoming other things. How is Marguerite? Her hands stilled. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then they resumed, reaching for the next bulb. In Bath, with our aunt. She writes every Thursday. Her letters are full of millinery and sea air and a young man named Mr. Alcott, who plays the violin badly and dances well. A breath that might have been a laugh in another life. She is safe. And you? The question landed between them like a stone in still water. Her hand stopped again. She held a bulb, fat, brown, unremarkable, and studied it as though it might contain instructions. I am planting tulips, Your Grace, in November, in a garden that belongs to no one. She looked at him. In the grey light, her green eyes had the quality of sea glass, something sharp that the world had smoothed. What does that tell you? That you are stubborn. That I am choosing what I can. She turned back to the earth. My sister is safe. The household runs. The deaths are structured. These are the things I could control, and I controlled them. Her voice did not waver. Her hands did not shake. But the strand of copper hair behind her left ear came loose again, and she tucked it back with a finger that moved too quickly. The only crack in the stone. He does not deserve you. Deserve. She said the word as if testing its weight. An interesting concept, from a man who rode 3 hours in the rain and still arrived 6 minutes late. It was not cruelty. It was precision. The steel rose, naming the wound with the accuracy of a surgeon who must cut before she can heal. Collins brought the documents on a Tuesday. 3 folders of increasing thickness, tied with solicitor's ribbon that smelled of office dust and professional caution. Alexander spread them across the library desk, the broad oak desk beneath the window, where the light was best in the morning. The desk where his father had once run the estate, with a competence that had turned out to be, in its final years, something less than competent. Mineral rights. The Shropshire leases. 3 separate surveys, conducted over 2 years, mapping coal deposits beneath land that Hargrove had acquired through a web of debt purchases and foreclosures. The surveys bore the stamp of a reputable firm, Whitaker and Smythe, London, but the dates did not align. The first survey was dated August 1814, but the firm's own records, which Collins had obtained through means Alexander chose not to examine too closely, showed no commission from Hargrove until March 1815. The survey was backdated, Alexander said. He set down the document with the care of a man handling something that might detonate. Collins nodded. And the mineral rights applications that cite those surveys as justification were filed on the strength of dates that did not exist at the time of application. Forgery. At minimum, fraud. Collins permitted himself the ghost of a frown. The families who sold, or were coerced into selling, their land based on Hargrove's representations of its value. Alexander's hand found the pocket watch. He turned it over and over, feeling the engraved initials. J.C.B. James Charles Blackmore, his father, wear smooth beneath his thumb. What was my father's involvement? Collins did not answer immediately. The silence had weight, the way silences do when they are carrying something they would prefer to set down. Your father witnessed 2 of the mineral rights applications. His signature appears as county magistrate. Was he complicit? He was accommodating. Collins chose the word the way a surgeon chooses a blade. Whether he knew the surveys were forged, or merely did not ask questions he did not want answered, that distinction may matter legally. It does not matter much otherwise. The library was cold. The fire was still unlit. Alexander had not lit it since the wedding night. A private penance that served no purpose except to remind him each morning of what stone felt like when it had forgotten warmth. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Cream paper, no seal, delivered by a boy from the village, who said a woman had paid him twopence and told him to run. He recognized her handwriting before he opened it. The particular way she formed her capital letters, upright and unapologetic, like a woman who had been taught penmanship by someone who valued clarity over elegance. "Your Grace," it began. "Stop investigating Lord Hargrove's mineral interests. Immediately. You do not know what he holds. I do. I married him because I knew, and because the alternative was your family's complete destruction. Your father's signature is on those documents, not as a witness, as a partner. Hargrove has letters in your father's hand that prove knowing participation in the fraud. If those letters become public, the Ashworth title faces attainder proceedings, and your estate is forfeit. I did not marry to save Marguerite. I married to save you. Do not come to Blackmere Park. Do not write. Do not continue what you have started." He read it 3 times. The 3rd time, his hands were shaking, not with the fine tremor of emotion, but with the gross tremor of a man whose understanding of the ground beneath his feet has just been replaced. She had known. Before the wedding, before the church, before the 6 minutes that had separated his life into before and after, she had known what Hargrove held. She had weighed the evidence. She had calculated the outcomes. And she had walked into St. Edmund's not as a victim being sold, but as a strategist executing a plan. She had married a man she did not love to protect a man she... He set the letter down, pressed both palms flat against the desk. The wood was solid and cold and real. "Collins." The steward appeared with the speed of a man who had been waiting on the other side of the door. "Everything you have gathered on my father's involvement. I want it here, tonight." He rode to Blackmere at dawn. Not through the night this time. He had learned what riding in the dark cost him. But in the thin grey light that precedes winter sunrise, when the world is the colour of unpolished silver and the air tastes of frozen grass. She was in the south garden. Of course she was, kneeling in the earth that was nearly frozen, wrapping burlap around the base of a young apple tree she must have planted recently. Her breath formed small clouds that dispersed quickly, as if even the air around her learned not to linger. "You had no right." He dismounted. His voice carried across the garden with more force than he intended, or perhaps exactly the force he intended. She did not stand. She continued wrapping burlap. "Good morning, Your Grace." "You sacrificed yourself for my family's sins, my father's sins, without asking, without telling me, without giving me the chance to..." "To what?" Now she stood, earth on her gloves, earth on her knees, copper hair loose because it was too early for pins, falling past her shoulders in waves that the morning light turned to the colour of autumn leaves. "To stop me? You tried that. You were 6 minutes late." "I was late because I didn't know the truth. If you had told me, if I had told you, you would have done something noble and stupid." She stripped off one glove, then the other. Her fingers were red with cold. "You would have confronted Hargrove directly. He would have released the letters. Your title, your estate, your tenants. 200 people depend on Thornfield, Your Grace. 200 people whose livelihoods would have ended because your father was a fool, and you were too proud to let someone else carry the weight. It was not your weight to carry." "No." Her chin lifted. The stillness came over her. That particular quality she possessed, the absolute cessation of unnecessary movement that made every word she spoke afterwards land like a verdict. "It was not. But I chose to carry it. I was not tricked. I was not coerced. I looked at the situation. I identified the options, and I selected the one that protected the most people." "You included yourself in the cost." "I was not a cost." Her voice did not rise. It never rose. It simply became more precise, like a lens focusing. "I was the architect. There is a difference." The morning air smelled of frost and turned earth, and beneath it, lily of the valley. She stood 3 feet from him. He could see the pulse in her throat, the only part of her body that acknowledged the force of this conversation. "I am not going to stop investigating," he said. "Then you are a fool. I am going to find those letters, and I am going to destroy them. And then I am going to take apart every fraudulent lease Hargrove holds, and when I am done, you will have a choice. A real choice, not the one he forced you into." She studied him, the way she studied things, completely, without hurry, cataloguing every detail against some internal ledger whose columns he could not see. "You cannot fight him alone. I am not asking your permission." "No." Something changed in her face. Not softness. Eleanor Voss did not do softness. But a recalibration. A door opening 1 inch where it had been closed. "You are not. And that is either very brave or remarkably idiotic. And I have not yet decided which." She picked up her gloves, tucked the strand of hair behind her left ear. "Come to the library at Thornfield on Friday, 8 o'clock. I have been copying Hargrove's household ledgers for 3 weeks, and there are discrepancies you will want to see." The library at Thornfield changed on that Friday. Not physically. The same oak desk, the same wing chair, the same tall windows that rattled in the November wind. But Alexander lit the fire. For the first time since the wedding night, he crossed the room and knelt before the cold grate and built a fire with his own hands. Kindling first, then the oak logs that Collins kept stacked by the door. The flame caught. The room exhaled. When Eleanor arrived at 8, the library was warm. She paused in the doorway, just for a moment, just long enough for him to see her register the change, and then she set a leather folio on the desk and opened it without ceremony. "Hargrove keeps 2 sets of books." She spread the pages. Her handwriting, the same firm capitals from the letter, filled margins with annotations. "The official household accounts show income from his agricultural leases, normal enough, but the actual expenditures exceed that income by a factor of 3. Alexander leaned forward. The firelight caught the ink. "Where does the excess come from?" "The mines, which officially don't exist yet. The mineral rights applications are still pending. But he's already extracting core from 3 sites in the Shropshire Hills." She turned a page. Her finger traced a column of figures. "These are payments to a hauling company in Shrewsbury. 27 loads over 4 months. You don't haul 27 loads of nothing." They worked for 3 hours. The fire settled and crackled. Rain began against the windows, soft at first, then earnest. The kind of November rain that sounds like the sky clearing its throat before making an announcement. She was methodical, relentless. Each figure she had copied was cross-referenced, annotated, connected to a web of other figures that painted a picture of systematic fraud. The kind that requires not just dishonesty, but infrastructure. "He employs 14 men at the mine sites," she said, turning another page. "Paid in cash, no records. I found the amounts because he uses a separate lockbox in his study for the cash. I counted it while he was at dinner." "You counted his money while he was in the next room." "The dining room is 40 feet from the study. He takes 2 courses and a port. That gives me approximately 90 minutes. She looked up. "I am efficient with 90 minutes. For the first time in weeks, something that was not grief or rage moved through Alexander's chest. It was not quite admiration. It was closer to awe. The quiet, disorienting awe of watching someone operate at a level you had not anticipated and cannot easily process. "You have been doing this since the wedding." "I have been doing this since before the wedding." She closed the folio. "You do not marry your enemy without a plan, Your Grace." They met on Tuesdays and Fridays. It became a pattern. Not discussed, not formally established, simply a rhythm that emerged the way rhythms do between people who are building something together. On the 2nd Tuesday, she arrived early. He found her already in the library, standing by the window, watching the rain. She had taken off her coat. It hung on the back of the chair she always used, and in her simple dress, without the armor of outerwear, she looked smaller. Not fragile. Eleanor Voss would never look fragile, but scaled differently. A woman in a room rather than a woman in a performance. "I found something," she said, turning from the window. She moved to the desk and opened the folio to a page she had marked with a strip of blue ribbon. "Look." He stood beside her, close enough to smell lily of the valley and cold November air, and something beneath both. The particular warmth of her skin, which he had no right to notice and could not stop noticing. Her finger pointed to a line in Hargrove's ledger. "This payment, £200 to a firm called Whitaker and Smythe." "The surveyors?" "The same firm that produced the backdated mineral surveys." She turned the page. "But look at the date. This payment was made in January 1814, 8 months before the first survey was supposedly conducted. He was paying them before they did the work. Because the work was predetermined. Because the work was fiction." She looked at him. They were standing very close. Her eyes in the firelight had depth, layers of green, like looking into a forest where the canopy lets through uneven light. He commissioned the results he wanted, paid in advance, and used those results to justify seizing land from families who trusted the county magistrate's endorsement. My father's endorsement. Yes. Their hands were on the same page, his right, her left. The paper was thin enough that he could feel the warmth of her fingers through it, not touching, but close enough that the air between their hands was warmer than the air around it. She did not move her hand. Neither did he. "We need the original letters," she said. "The ones between Hargrove and your father. They're in a locked drawer in his study. I've seen the key, but I've never had an opportunity to use it." "How well do you know the layout of his study?" "I married the man. I know every room in that house." She withdrew her hand. The motion was deliberate, controlled, a decision, not a flinch. "Including the ones he thinks I don't." The county Christmas ball was held, as it was every year, at Harwood House, neutral ground, belonging to the elderly Lord Harwood, who cared about nothing except that the champagne was French and the dancing started by 9. Alexander saw her the moment he entered the ballroom. Not because she stood out. Every woman in the room was dressed in silk and candles and ambition. But because his body had developed a compass for her, a physical orientation that operated below conscious thought, like the way a sunflower tracks light. She wore dark green, not the pale green of spring debutantes, but the deep, serious green of holly in winter. Her copper hair was pinned high, exposing the architecture of her neck, and the small pearl earrings that caught the light when she turned her head. Hargrove stood beside her with his hand on the small of her back, the territorial gesture of a man displaying a possession. They danced. It was inevitable. County society required it. The social mathematics of hosts and guests and neighbours demanded that the Duke of Ashworth dance with Lady Hargrove as a matter of form. The orchestra played a waltz. She placed her hand in his. The contact was light, proper, exactly the pressure required by the dance, and not 1 ounce more. And yet, "You are staring," she said. "I am leading." "You are staring while leading. It is possible to do one without the other." The waltz turned them past the windows. Her hand was warm through her glove. His hand rested on her waist, the curve of bone and muscle beneath silk, the architecture of a body he had mapped in imagination and was now touching, with witnesses, under the pretense of choreography. "Tuesday," he said quietly. "I have something to show you." Collins found the land transfer records for the Pemberton estate. "Not here." "I know. And not that expression. Hargrove is watching." He adjusted his face. The waltz ended. They separated with the correct distance, the correct nod, the correct social temperature. She returned to Hargrove's side. His hand resumed its position on her back. Across the room, Alexander picked up a glass of champagne he did not want and watched her perform. The perfect wife, the gracious Lady Hargrove, smiling at the vicar's wife and discussing the new curtains at Blackmere Park with every appearance of genuine interest. Only he could see the steel rose beneath the silk. Only he knew that the woman discussing curtain fabric had spent 3 hours that week mapping the financial architecture of her husband's criminal enterprise in a library that now smelled of oak smoke and lily of the valley. December brought the kind of cold that makes houses speak. floorboards contracting, pipes murmuring, window frames tapping against their casements as if asking to be let out. The library at Thornfield was warm. The fire had been burning since 4 o'clock, and the oak logs had reached that perfect stage where they glow without flame, radiating heat that sinks into wool and leather and the pages of open books. Eleanor sat in what had become, through repetition, her chair, the wingback by the fire, slightly smaller than his, angled so that the light fell over her left shoulder onto whatever she was reading. Tonight it was not Hargrove's ledgers. Tonight, for the first time, she had arrived without the leather folio. "Fielding," she said, holding up the book. "Tom Jones. I found it on your shelf." "My mother's copy." "I know. Her name is on the flyleaf. Catherine Anne Blackmore. Beautiful handwriting." Rain against the windows. Not the hard, driving rain of November, but the steady, conversational rain of December. Rain that plans to stay, that has unpacked its bags and settled in. She read aloud. He did not ask her to. She simply began, in a voice that was not performative, not the voice of a woman entertaining a drawing room, but conversational, intimate. The voice of a person reading to someone they do not need to impress. She read about Tom's adventures with the same measured pace she used to dissect Hargrove's accounts, and the effect was the same. Meticulous attention to detail, a refusal to skip or rush, a respect for the material that was, in its way, a form of tenderness. Alexander watched. He was aware that he was watching, aware of what it meant, aware that this scene, the fire, the rain, the woman reading in his chair, in his library, in his house, was a living portrait of a future that might never exist. She turned a page. The firelight moved across her face. The strand of copper hair escaped and was tucked back. "You are not listening," she said, without looking up. "I'm listening to everything except the words." A pause. She lowered the book by half an inch. Her eyes found his over the top edge. Something in them. Not warmth, not invitation, but acknowledgement. The quiet recognition of two people standing on either side of a door that neither of them is ready to open. "That," she said, "is a very dangerous sentence, Your Grace." "Alexander." "That is an even more dangerous word." She returned to the book. He returned to watching. The fire crackled. The rain continued. The pocket watch, for the first time since November, was not in his hand but on the mantelpiece, face down, as if it too had decided to stop counting. The servant's name was Briggs, a footman, young, poorly paid, with a mother in the village who owed Hargrove £40, which made him, in Hargrove's economy, an asset rather than an employee. Eleanor discovered the surveillance on a Wednesday. She had returned from Thornfield, a Tuesday meeting that had run long because the Pemberton documents were more complex than expected, and found her writing desk rearranged. Not dramatically. The inkpot moved 2 inches to the left, the blotter at a different angle. Small things that a careless person would miss, but that a woman who managed her environment with the precision of a cartographer noticed immediately. Hargrove was in the drawing room when she entered. He sat in the leather chair by the fire, his chair, in his room, in his house, with a glass of brandy that was not his first. "You've been visiting Ashworth?" Not a question. She stood in the doorway. She did not enter. "I have been taking walks." "Walks that end at Thornfield Hall?" He swirled the brandy. The glass caught the light. "Briggs follows you, you know. I find it prudent to know where my investments go." "Your wife." Her voice carried the temperature of January. "Not your investment." "In this house, my dear, the distinction is academic." He stood. He was taller than her by a full head, broader by twice, and he used his body the way a door uses its frame, to define the space available to others. "What does Ashworth want?" "Company." "Company." He said the word as if tasting it for contamination. The Duke of Ashworth. Eligible, wealthy, tediously upright. seeks the company of a married woman. In his library, on Tuesday and Friday evenings. She did not step back. The steel rose did not retreat from anything that stood in front of her. We discuss literature. You discuss nothing. You conspire. He set the glass down. The sound was soft, but final. The sound of patience ending. I have been generous, Eleanor. I have allowed you your garden and your household management and your little domestic improvements. But if you imagine that your friendship with Ashworth will produce anything other than public humiliation for you and legal consequences for him— Consequences. She said the word the way he had said company, testing it, examining it, finding it insufficient. You speak of consequences as if you are the only person in this marriage who understands them. I am the only person in this marriage who controls them. No. She stepped into the room. One step. Deliberate, measured, the way a chess player advances a piece. You are the person who believes he controls them. There is a difference. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Hargrove did not do anger in the conventional sense. Calculation. The rapid reassessment of a man who has just discovered that the ground he is standing on may not be as solid as his surveyor reported. Be careful, Eleanor. I am always careful. She turned. In the doorway, she paused. I was careful the day I married you. Every day since has been an extension of that care. Collins found the final piece on the 2nd day of January, in a filing cabinet at the county records office that had been mislabeled, intentionally, they would later determine, as Agricultural Surveys 1809 to 1812. The signatures do not match. Alexander looked up from the desk. The library was warm. It was always warm now, the fire lit before noon, the room breathing with the heat of regular occupation. Explain. Hargrove's applications for mineral rights at the 3 Shropshire sites each bear the signature of the landowner consenting to survey. But 2 of those landowners were already deceased at the time of signing. Collins placed the documents side by side, with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. He forged their signatures, and the 3rd signature, Mrs. Pemberton's, does not match any specimen we have of her actual hand. 3 forged consent documents. 3 forged consent documents, 3 backdated surveys, and 14 land transfers executed under fraudulent representations. Collins straightened. Your Grace, under the Property and Mineral Rights Act of 1810, marriages entered into under coercive circumstances related to fraudulent debt instruments may be subject to annulment proceedings. The word landed in the room like a stone breaking glass. Annulment. Alexander stood. The pocket watch was on the mantel. He had left it there after the quiet evening, and it had stayed, face down, accumulating dust with the patience of objects that had been retired from service. If we can prove the debts Hargrove used to coerce Eleanor's family were themselves the product of fraud, then the marriage was entered under material misrepresentation, which is grounds for annulment in ecclesiastical court. Collins paused. With sufficient evidence. We have the evidence. We have parts of the evidence. The forged signatures, the backdated surveys, the financial discrepancies Eleanor has documented. But we need the letters, the correspondence between Hargrove and your father. Without those, Hargrove can claim ignorance of the forgeries and shift blame to the surveyors. The letters are in his study. Yes, Your Grace. Alexander crossed to the window. Outside, the January garden was white with frost. The tulip bulbs Eleanor had planted in November were invisible beneath the frozen earth, dormant, patient, holding their color for a spring that had not arrived but would. Friday, he said. She said his dinner engagement runs 90 minutes. Your Grace, I feel compelled to observe that what you are contemplating is necessary. He picked up the pocket watch from the mantel, turned it over. The case was cool against his palm. Arrange for a distraction, something that keeps Hargrove at dinner an extra hour. Eleanor's response, when he told her on Friday, was not what he expected. No, She stood by the fire. The leather folio was open on the desk, but forgotten. The first time in 2 months of meetings that the work had been pushed aside. No. You will not break into his study. You are the Duke of Ashworth. If you are caught, I was not planning to be caught. No one plans to be caught. That is what makes getting caught so inconvenient. She crossed her arms. Not the defensive crossing of a woman shielding herself, but the structural crossing of a woman reinforcing her position. I will do it. Absolutely not. I live there. She said it with the flat certainty of someone stating a geographic fact. I know where the key is. I know the timing of the servants' rounds. I know which floorboard outside the study creaks and which ones don't. She paused. And I am his wife. If I am found in his study at 10 o'clock in the evening, I am a woman looking for a book. If you are found in his study at 10 o'clock in the evening, you are a criminal. The logic was impeccable. He hated it. I will not let you take this risk alone. You will not let me. She repeated the words with the specific emphasis of a woman who has been let and not let by men for her entire life and has formed opinions about it. I do not require your permission, Your Grace. I require your solicitor's address, so I know where to deliver the documents. Eleanor. Alexander. The fire cracked. They stood on opposite sides of it, the desk between them, the evidence spread across it, the entire architecture of 2 months' work leading to this moment where one of them would do something irreversible. Saturday, she said. Hargrove dines with Lord Wexford. He never returns before midnight from Wexford's. The port is exceptional, and Wexford likes an audience. I will have the letters by 11. Saturday night, 9:45. Eleanor moved through Blackmere Park the way she moved through everything, with the deliberate economy of a woman who had learned that wasted motion was wasted opportunity. The servants were in the kitchen. Saturday was their informal night. Cook made something hearty, and the footman played cards. The sound of laughter drifted up through the service stairs, warm and distant, a soundtrack from a version of this house that was not quite this house. The study door was unlocked. Hargrove locked it when he was home, a habit of a man who trusted no one. But when he was out, the key hung on a hook inside the butler's pantry, and Eleanor had copied it 3 weeks ago, using a wax impression and a locksmith in the next village who asked no questions because she paid double. The room smelled of cigars and leather and the slightly metallic tang of old paper. She did not light a lamp. The moonlight through the study window, Hargrove had not bothered with heavy drapes in a room he considered his alone, was sufficient. The locked drawer was the second from the top on the right side of the desk. She knelt. The copied key turned with a click so small it was swallowed by the silence before it could travel. Inside, letters. A stack of them, tied with black ribbon, the kind of unnecessary theatrical touch that Hargrove would appreciate. She recognized the handwriting on the top letter immediately. James Charles Blackmore, Alexander's father. She did not read them. There would be time for reading. Now was the time for taking. She lifted the stack. Beneath it, a second bundle, not letters, but documents. Land transfers, consent forms, the originals of everything they had been reconstructing from copies and county records for 2 months. She took everything. She closed the drawer, locked it, stood, smoothed her skirt with the reflexive gesture of a woman who maintains composure the way a gardener maintains soil, constantly, instinctively, because everything else depends on it. She was 3 steps from the door when the hallway light went on. Hargrove stood in the doorway. His coat was still on. His cravat was loosened, the single concession to informality that he allowed himself, and only after dark, and only in his own house. Wexford's port was inferior tonight. His eyes moved from her face to her hands, empty because the documents were already in the deep pocket of her dress, the one she had sewn herself last week, specifically for this purpose. I left early. I was looking for a book. Her voice was steady, level, the fire that cost something to maintain. In my locked study. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the room. With the key you copied. She did not deny it. The Steel Rose did not waste energy on denials that would not be believed. Yes. The word hung between them. Hargrove moved to the desk. Slowly. The measured tread she had learned to track. 3 steps to the desk, one hand on the surface, the other reaching for the locked drawer. He opened it. The silence that followed had dimensions, height and width and depth. A physical thing that filled the room and pressed against the walls. You have taken my letters. I have taken evidence of fraud. She did not move. She stood in the center of the room with the stillness that was her weapon, the absolute composure that made every word she spoke afterwards carry the weight of a document already notarized. Every forged survey, every backdated consent, every letter in which you and the late Duke of Ashworth conspired to steal mineral rights from families who trusted you. Hargrove's hand closed on the edge of the drawer. His knuckles whitened. You have no idea what you are holding. I have a very precise idea. She lifted her chin. I have spent 3 months in this house. I have copied your ledgers. I have counted your money. I have mapped every payment, every forgery, every lie. And I have done it with the thoroughness of a woman who understood on her wedding day. But the only way out of this marriage was through the evidence. You will return those documents. I will not. He moved toward her, not quickly. Hargrove was not a man of quick movements, but with the deliberate approach of someone who has always used physical proximity as a tool of control. He was taller, broader, accustomed to the way his presence made people smaller. Eleanor did not step back. Every family you destroyed. Her voice carried the level precision of a scalpel. The Pembertons, the Voss family, my family. The tenants who lost their land because a surveyor you paid wrote the numbers you wanted. She held his gaze the way she held everything, completely, without flinch, without waste. It ends tonight. And what will you do? Go to the magistrate? I own the magistrate. I will go to the Lord Chancellor's office. She straightened, though she had not been leaning. The motion created the impression of gaining height, of occupying more space without moving her feet. I will go to the ecclesiastical court, and I will present evidence that this marriage was entered under material misrepresentation arising from fraudulent debt coercion. Annulment, Philip. Not divorce. Annulment. As if this marriage never existed. Something changed in his face, the calculation behind his eyes. The rapid assessment of angles and leverage that was his native mode of thought produced a result he did not like. You would destroy yourself. The scandal. I would survive the scandal. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, without volume, without drama, as a statement of fact arrived at through careful analysis. I have survived worse things than gossip. I survived marrying you. The door opened behind him. Alexander did not burst in. He entered the way he entered every room Eleanor was in, with an awareness that preceded thought, a physical orientation toward her presence that operated like gravity. Behind him, Collins, and behind Collins, a man Alexander did not introduce because his presence spoke for itself. Mr. Bartholomew Hughes, senior solicitor of Hughes, Wren and Associates, Lincoln's Inn, carrying a leather case and the unmistakable authority of a man who has come to execute legal proceedings. Lord Hargrove. Alexander's voice was controlled. Not calm, controlled, the way a river is controlled by its banks. We can do this quietly, or we can do it in the Lord Chancellor's courtroom. The choice, for once, is yours. Hargrove looked from Alexander to Eleanor, back to Alexander, to the solicitor, to the leather case. She came to you. She did not need to. Alexander moved to stand beside Eleanor, not in front of her, beside her. We have independent evidence from county records, bank transfers, and 3 witnesses who will testify to the forgery of their signatures on consent documents. Eleanor reached into her pocket, drew out the bundle of letters, held them in the air between herself and Hargrove, not offering them, not threatening with them, simply displaying them, the way a card player reveals a winning hand.
"These are your insurance policy," she said.
The letters that would have destroyed the Ashworth name. The leverage you used to force this marriage. She set them on the desk, gently. They are no longer useful to you, because the Duke of Ashworth already knows what his father did, and he chose truth over reputation. Hargrove sat down, not gracefully. He dropped into his chair with the sudden deflation of a man whose internal framework has been removed. The silver hair, the immaculate tailoring, the signet ring, all of it remained, but the structure beneath it had gone. Mr. Hughes opened his leather case. The library at Thornfield. A Tuesday in February. The fire burning the way it always burned now. Steadily, reliably, with the constancy of a thing that has decided to stay. The annulment papers had been filed. The ecclesiastical court had accepted the petition on grounds of material misrepresentation. Hargrove, facing criminal charges for fraud and forgery, had not contested. His solicitor had quietly begun negotiations for a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation with the Lord Chancellor's investigation into the mineral rights fraud. Eleanor stood by the window, not looking out, looking at the glass itself, at the pattern of frost that had formed overnight on the inside of the pane. Her finger traced one of the crystals, a feathered structure that branched and branched again, like a decision tree. I rode through the night to stop a wedding. Alexander's voice came from behind her. She did not turn. He stood by the fire, and the warmth of it pressed against his back while the cold of the window pulled at her. I was 6 minutes late. You have mentioned this. Still tracing the frost, still not turning. I have counted every minute since. He reached into his waistcoat. The pocket watch, his father's watch, the one that had measured the worst 6 minutes of his life, lay in his palm. He crossed to the mantelpiece and set it down, face up this time. Ticking. I am done counting. She turned. In the February light, her copper hair held every shade between amber and bronze, and her green eyes had the quality they always had when she was deciding something. Still, deep, assessing the weight of what was being offered against the weight of what it would cost. Alexander, you called me that once, in this room, and then you took it back. I did not take it back. I deferred it. She moved from the window, one step, then another. The strand of copper hair behind her ear, she did not tuck it back. She let it fall. I have been deferring many things. Eleanor. He stood still. The steel rose could cross a room on her own terms. He understood that. I'm not asking you to choose me over your independence. I'm asking you to let me stand where I have been standing for 3 months. Beside you, not in front, not behind. Her hand found his. Not the formal contact of a waltz or the accidental brush over a ledger. Her fingers interlaced with his, deliberately, the way roots interlace with earth, finding every space and filling it. I will not be managed, she said. I know. I will not be protected from things I am capable of handling. I know. And if you ever ride through the night again without telling me first, I will be extremely specific in my displeasure. I would expect nothing less. She kissed him, or he kissed her, or they kissed each other. The distinction dissolved in the contact, which tasted of tea and lily of the valley, and the January frost that was still on her lips from standing by the window. His hand found the curve of her waist, the same place he had touched during the waltz, but without gloves now, without witnesses, without the architecture of social propriety separating skin from meaning. When they separated, she rested her forehead against his collarbone. He felt her breathe. In, out. The rhythm of a woman who had been holding her breath for 4 months and was, finally, allowing herself to exhale. 6 minutes, she said against his chest. 6 minutes. We have made up for them. The annulment was granted on the 14th of March, a Tuesday. Eleanor noted the day of the week and said nothing, but the corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but contained one, the way a bud contains a flower. Hargrove's case proceeded through the courts with the grinding inevitability of stone wheels. 3 counts of fraud, 5 of forgery. 14 families petitioned for restoration of their land. The Lord Chancellor's office, embarrassed by the scope of the corruption, moved with unusual speed. The letters between Hargrove and the late Duke of Ashworth were presented to the court in sealed session. Alexander sat in the gallery and listened to his father's words read aloud by a clerk who did not understand their weight. Accommodation, participation, the precise, damning language of a gentleman who had made an ungentlemanly choice and documented it in ink. Eleanor sat beside him. She did not hold his hand, not in public, not yet, but her shoulder pressed against his, and the contact was enough. "Your father made a mistake," she said afterward in the carriage. "He did not make you." The wedding was in May, small. The library at Thornfield, not a church. Eleanor said she had experienced enough churches, and Alexander said he had experienced enough arriving late to them, and that was the end of the discussion. The library at Thornfield Hall in September smelled of oak smoke and old paper and the last roses of summer, which Eleanor had cut from the garden that morning and set in a blue ceramic vase on the mantelpiece beside a pocket watch that no longer kept time. It had stopped in April. Alexander had not repaired it. "It measured the worst night of my life," he told her when she asked. "Let it rest." September light came through the tall windows at a low angle, turning everything gold. The book spines, the desk surface, the copper hair of the woman curled in the wing chair by the fire with a ledger open on her knee. Not Hargrove's ledger, Thornfield's. She had taken over the estate accounts in June, and the household had run with a precision and warmth that Collins described as unprecedented, and Alexander described as Eleanor. She read aloud from the ledger: harvest yields, tenant rents, the cost of repairing the south wall of the dairy, and he listened from the opposite chair with the specific attention of a man who finds the sound of a woman reading numbers more compelling than any poetry ever written. Rain began against the windows. September rain, soft, warm, the kind that feeds rather than floods. The same sound as November, but everything it touched had changed. "The tulips came up," she said, not looking up from the ledger. "In April. 47 of them, I counted." She turned a page. "They'll come back next year, and the year after. That is how bulbs work. You plant something in frozen ground, and it waits, and then it doesn't." He crossed the room, took the ledger from her hands, gently, because you do not take things from Eleanor Voss without her permission, and the way she released it was permission. He set it on the desk, knelt beside her chair. The strand of copper hair had escaped again. He tucked it behind her left ear, his finger tracing the curve of her jaw, and she leaned into the touch, the way a garden leans into rain. "Alexander, Eleanor, you are being sentimental. I am being accurate." He kissed her temple. The skin there was warm and smelled of lily of the valley and September sun. "I rode through the night and arrived too late. And then I spent 4 months in this library, learning that the woman I came to save did not need saving. She needed a partner." "And better timing," he laughed. The sound filled the library, a room that had been cold and empty a year ago, and was now warm and full and alive with the accumulated evidence of 2 people who had chosen each other not in a single dramatic moment, but in 100 small ones. A fire lit, a chair claimed, a hand held over a shared page, a name spoken in the dark. The pocket watch on the mantel had stopped. The rain continued. In the garden between 2 estates, the bulbs slept beneath the earth. holding their color for a spring that would come because it always came. Patient, inevitable, worth the frost. If you've ever arrived too late for something that mattered, 6 minutes, 6 months, 6 years, and then discovered that too late was only the beginning of the real story, you understand what this library knows. That love is not a rescue, it is a collaboration. And the best ones begin with the words, "I will not be managed." Tell me in the comments, have you ever planted something in frozen ground and waited for it to come up? And while you're here, if this story kept you company tonight, consider subscribing. New stories every week, read by the fire.